The gentle hum of the television filled the cozy living room as Evelyn sat curled up on the couch, flipping through her notebook. The scent of her mother's signature lavender and chamomile tea wafted in from the kitchen, where her mom hummed a soft tune while drying dishes. The scene was tranquil, almost idyllic, and Evelyn cherished these rare moments of quiet in their small but comfortable home. Her stepfather, Aidan, entered the room, breaking the peaceful ambience with his usual air of confidence. Tall and well-groomed, he carried himself with a charm that had won her mother over years ago. But Evelyn always felt a subtle tension in his presence, as though a hidden layer of his personality was carefully masked. "Evening, Evie," he said with his characteristic smile, though something in his eyes seemed to pierce deeper tonight. "Got a minute?" Evelyn straightened. "Sure, what's up?" She noticed her mom pausing in the kitchen doorway, her hands nervously wringing the dishcloth. Aidan moved closer, settling into the armchair across from her. "I need your help with something." "Nothing too big, just a little favor." Her brows knitted in mild confusion. Aidan rarely asked for help, let alone from her. She glanced at her mom, who avoided her gaze, retreating into the kitchen with a hurried excuse about putting the kettle on. "What kind of favor?" Evelyn asked cautiously. Aidan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice dropped slightly, as though sharing a secret. "It's about a deal I've been working on. Some paperwork I need reviewed. Thought you'd be perfect for it. You're smart, thorough," and he paused, his smile widening. "I trust you." Something about the way he said it made her skin crawl. The words sounded genuine, but there was a peculiar weight to them, as though they carried an unspoken warning. Evelyn's mind raced. Her stepfather was a businessman, known for his savvy deals and impeccable timing. But what could he possibly need her, a history major fresh out of college, to look over? "I don't know," she began hesitantly. I'm not exactly qualified for business stuff." "Nonsense." He waved her concerns away, his tone smooth, reassuring. "You're more than qualified. I've seen how meticulous you are with details, always double-checking everything. That's all I need. A second pair of eyes." Evelyn shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Why not ask Mom? The question lingered in the air for a moment too long. Aidan's smile faltered, ever so slightly, before returning with practiced ease. "This isn't really her area," he said lightly. "Besides, she's got enough on her plate." Evelyn glanced toward the kitchen, catching her mother's silhouette frozen mid-motion. She felt an inexplicable pull to protect her mom, even as doubt churned in her gut. "What's in it for me?" she asked, half joking, attempting to lighten the mood. Aidan's eyes glinted. "Help me, and you'll get everything you want." The room seemed to darken. His voice, smooth as silk, now carried an edge that sent a shiver down her spine. She forced a laugh to hide her discomfort. "Everything, huh? That's a tall order." "You'll see," he said cryptically. Standing, he patted her shoulder, lingering just a second too long. "Think it over, Evie. Let me know by tomorrow." As Aidan walked away, Evelyn felt the weight of his words pressing down on her, suffocating. She turned toward the kitchen, seeking solace in her mother's familiar warmth, but her mom had already disappeared upstairs. The once cozy atmosphere now felt suffused with unease. Evelyn stared at the blank screen of the television, her heart pounding. Something wasn't right. Aidan's request, his demeanor, even the way her mom had slipped away, all of it screamed a warning she couldn't yet decipher. But one thing was certain, whatever Aidan wanted from her, it wasn't just a favor. The following morning, Evelyn woke to a gray drizzle tapping against her window. The gloom mirrored her unease, the memory of her stepfather's request swirling in her mind like storm clouds. She lingered in bed longer than usual, unable to shake the image of his unsettling smile. "Help me, and you'll get everything you want." What could he possibly mean? As she descended the staircase, the faint aroma of breakfast greeted her, coffee brewing, eggs sizzling. Her mom was at the stove, humming softly as though the tension of the previous evening had evaporated. Aidan was nowhere in sight. "Morning, sweetie," her mom said, her voice too bright. "Hungry?" "Starving," Evelyn replied, forcing a smile as she slid into a chair at the table. Her appetite, however, was non-existent. She picked at her toast, watching her mother bustling about the kitchen. She longed to ask her about Aidan's request, but stopped herself. Something about her mother's careful movements, the way she avoided direct eye contact, warned Evelyn to tread lightly. Aidan arrived moments later, his presence commanding as always. He was dressed sharply, as though heading to an important meeting, but his attention was fixed solely on Evelyn. "Good morning, Evie," he greeted with an almost jovial tone. "Did you think about what we discussed?" Her mother paused mid-motion, gripping the edge of the counter. Evelyn's stomach twisted at the sight, but she steeled herself, meeting Aiden's gaze. "I did," she said, trying to sound calm, "but I need more details. What exactly am I looking at?" His smile broadened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course I'll walk you through everything. It's just a few documents that need a fresh perspective, contracts, mainly. Nothing you can't handle." Evelyn glanced at her mom, whose knuckles were white against the countertop. "Why do you need me, though? Don't you have lawyers for that?" Aiden chuckled, brushing off her concerns. "Lawyers can't always be trusted, Evie. Too many conflicts of interest. Sometimes it's best to keep things in the family." The way he said family made her skin crawl. Still, she nodded slowly, knowing she couldn't push back without arousing suspicion. "Okay, I'll take a look." "Excellent." He clapped his hands together, his enthusiasm unnerving. "Come by my office this afternoon and I'll show you everything." Evelyn spent the rest of the morning in a haze, her thoughts tangled in a web of doubt. She tried to focus on her coursework, but every time she picked up her pen, Aiden's words echoed in her mind. Contracts, lawyers, conflicts of interest, none of it sat right with her. By the time she arrived at his home office, her resolve had solidified. She needed answers. The room was impeccably neat, the dark mahogany desk organized with military precision. Aiden gestured for her to sit across from him, sliding a thick folder toward her. "These are the papers," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Take your time. I'll step out so you can concentrate." Evelyn hesitated, watching him leave before opening the folder. At first glance, the documents seemed like standard contracts, leases, agreements, clauses filled with legal jargon she didn't fully understand. But as she flipped through the pages, something caught her eye. A clause buried in the middle of one contract referenced an offshore account tied to a suspiciously vague consulting fee. Another document outlined a business venture that required Evelyn's signature as a witness despite her having no involvement in the company. Her heart raced. This wasn't just paperwork, it was a web of deceit, carefully disguised in legalese. The more she read, the clearer it became. Aiden was hiding something big, and he was trying to drag her into it. She closed the folder with trembling hands just as Aiden returned. "Find anything interesting?" he asked casually, but his sharp gaze betrayed him. "What exactly is this?" she demanded, holding up the folder. "These aren't normal contracts." Aiden's expression hardened, his charm dissolving like a mask peeled away. He leaned over the desk, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I need you to sign those documents, Evelyn. No questions asked." Her blood turned to ice. "Why me? Why not Mom?" "Because your mother wouldn't understand," he said, his tone flat. "You're smarter. And I trust you to keep this between us." The implication was clear. Evelyn's chest tightened as she realized the full extent of his manipulation. He wasn't asking for her help, he was pulling her into a scheme she barely understood, a scheme that could ruin them all. She pushed the folder back toward him, her voice firm. "I can't do this, Aiden." He smiled again, but this time it was cold, predatory. "Think carefully, Evie. You wouldn't want to disappoint me." Evelyn stared at him, her pulse hammering in her ears. She was trapped, and the walls were closing in fast. Evelyn's hands felt clammy as she closed the folder, her pulse racing like a drumbeat in her chest. The weight of the documents pressed down on her shoulders, a heavy burden of secrets she hadn't asked for. Aiden's cryptic smile only made it worse, his calm demeanor at odds with the storm brewing inside her. "Evie, why so tense?" he asked, feigning concern. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "I don't think you've told me everything," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "These documents, they don't make sense. Offshore accounts. Consulting fees. Why do you need me to sign them?" Aiden sighed, shaking his head as though she were an unruly child. "You're overthinking this. These are just formalities, legal hoops to jump through. It's all above board." Evelyn stared at him, disbelief etched into her features. "If it's above board, then why can't a lawyer handle it? Why are you pushing me into this?" The room grew cold as Aiden's mask slipped. His smile faded, replaced by a steely gaze that sent chills down her spine. "Because, Evelyn," he said slowly, "sometimes things are better handled quietly. No need to involve people who don't understand the bigger picture." His words were laced with an unspoken threat, and Evelyn realized she was stepping into dangerous territory. She forced herself to hold his gaze. "What are you hiding?" Aiden leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "You have a lot of questions for someone I'm offering to help. Maybe you should consider how this benefits you, Evie. You want to help your mom, don't you? You want her to stay happy, safe." Her stomach churned as she grasped the implication. This wasn't just about her, it was about her mother too. He was using her love for her mom as leverage, manipulating her into compliance. "That's low, even for you," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. He chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Low. Evelyn, this is how the world works. You make compromises to get what you want. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger, to ensure your family's future. Don't be naive." The words struck a nerve, igniting a spark of defiance within her. "This isn't about the family. It's about you." Aiden's expression darkened, his patience wearing thin. "You're smarter than this," he said sharply. "Think about what you're saying. You want to blow this out of proportion and ruin everything. For what? A moral stand?" The weight of his words pressed on her, but Evelyn refused to back down. "I'm not signing anything until I know the truth." Silence filled the room, heavy and oppressive. Aiden's jaw tightened as he regarded her with cold calculation. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You want the truth? Fine. Those documents are part of a business deal that's unconventional. It's not illegal, but it's sensitive. If you don't sign, it falls apart. And if it falls apart, we all pay the price." "Unconventional," she repeated, disbelief coloring her tone. "You mean shady." He smirked. "Call it what you want. It's the kind of deal that separates winners from losers. And I'm not about to lose." Evelyn's mind raced. She needed to stall, to figure out her next move. "I need time to think." "Time?" Aiden barked a bitter laugh. "We don't have time. This needs to happen now." "Then you'll have to find someone else," she said, standing. Her legs wobbled, but she willed them to steady. "I'm not doing this." Before she could take another step, Aiden rose, blocking her path. "You're not leaving until we settle this?" he said, his voice dangerously low. Evelyn's breath caught. The door felt a mile away, and Aiden loomed like a shadow, his presence suffocating. "What are you going to do, Aiden? Keep me here? Force me to sign?" His lips curled into a predatory smile. "I wouldn't have to force you if you understood what's at stake." A sudden knock at the door shattered the tension. Both of them turned as Evelyn's mother entered, her face lined with concern. "What's going on in here?" Evelyn's heart leapt with relief. "Mom." "We're just having a discussion," Aiden interrupted smoothly, his charm snapping back into place. "Evelyn's a bit overwhelmed, but I was explaining how important this is for all of us." Her mother frowned, glancing between them. "Evelyn, is everything okay?" Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The last thing she wanted was to drag her mom into this mess, to burden her with the truth. "I'm fine," she said finally, her voice strained. "Just thinking it over." Her mother hesitated, clearly unconvinced. "If you're sure." "I'm sure," Evelyn lied, her gaze fixed on Aiden. He met her eyes with a look that promised there would be consequences if she didn't comply. As her mom left, Evelyn felt trapped, her options dwindling. She needed to act, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed someone who could help her unravel Aiden's scheme, someone she could trust. But in a house where trust was a scarce commodity, Evelyn realized she might have to face this battle on her own. Evelyn couldn't sleep that night. The weight of Aiden's request pressed heavily on her chest, each breath tight and shallow. The thought of those contracts, the offshore accounts, and Aiden's thinly veiled threats gnawed at her. She had promised herself she wouldn't give in, but now the stakes felt insurmountable. The fear in her mother's eyes earlier replayed in her mind like a haunting melody. She sat at her desk, her laptop glowing in the dim room. If Aiden wasn't going to tell her the truth, she'd have to uncover it herself. Her fingers trembled as she typed keywords from the documents into search engines, trying to piece together the puzzle. "Unconventional business deal," she muttered to herself. "Consulting fees, offshore accounts." Most of the results were irrelevant, legal jargon she could barely understand. But one link caught her attention, an article about fraudulent shell companies used to launder money. Her blood ran cold as she scanned the text, the tactics eerily similar to the terms she had seen in Aiden's papers. Evelyn grabbed her phone and hesitated before texting her best friend, Clara. Clara was a law student, and the only person Evelyn trusted enough to confide in. "Can you meet me tomorrow? It's urgent," she typed, sending the message before she could second-guess herself. The next day, Evelyn and Clara sat at a secluded table in a quiet cafe. Evelyn handed Clara photocopies of the documents she'd made that morning, her voice low as she explained the situation. "Your stepdad wants you to sign these," Clara asked, flipping through the pages, her brow furrowed. "This is serious, Avie. Like prison time serious." Evelyn's stomach churned. "I knew it was bad, but prison." Clara nodded grimly. This isn't just shady. It's illegal. If you sign these, you're implicating yourself. It won't matter if you didn't know what you were signing. Your name will be on the dotted line. Evelyn buried her face in her hands. What do I do? He's putting so much pressure on me. And he's using my mom as leverage. Clara leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. You need to protect yourself. Don't sign anything. And we need to get evidence, something concrete to prove Aiden's behind this. But how? Evelyn asked, desperation creeping into her voice. He's careful. He doesn't leave anything out in the open. Clara thought for a moment, then smiled slyly. Maybe he doesn't leave things out in the open, but he's not perfect. People like Aiden always think they're untouchable, and that makes them sloppy somewhere. We just have to find the crack. Encouraged by Clara's confidence, Evelyn devised a plan. That evening, she waited until Aiden left the house for a meeting. She slipped into his office, her heart pounding in her chest. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, a stark reminder of his presence, even in his absence. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that could incriminate him. She opened drawers, careful to leave everything exactly as she found it. Files, ledgers, and notebooks cluttered the space, but nothing seemed useful. Then she noticed his computer. Evelyn hesitated. She wasn't a hacker, but maybe there was something obvious: an email, a file, anything. She wiggled the mouse, and to her surprise, the screen lit up without requiring a password. Idiot, she muttered under her breath. The desktop was meticulously organized, but a folder labeled private caught her eye. She opened it, her pulse quickening as she scanned the contents. Contracts, emails, and spreadsheets filled the folder, each one more damning than the last. A document titled Finalized Offshore Agreements made her stomach drop. She quickly snapped pictures of everything with her phone, her hands shaking. As she worked, a soft creak behind her made her freeze. She turned slowly to see her mother standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of confusion and worry. Evelyn, what are you doing? Her mom whispered, stepping into the room. Mom, I need you to trust me, Evelyn said, her voice trembling. Aiden's hiding something illegal. If we don't act now, he's going to drag us down with him. Her mother's face paled. Illegal? No, Aiden would never. Mom, he's manipulating us. Evelyn interrupted, her frustration spilling over. He's not the man you think he is. Tears welled in her mom's eyes as she sat down heavily on the armchair. I knew he was keeping things from me, but I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to think he had our best interests at heart. Evelyn knelt beside her, clutching her hands. It's not your fault. But we can't stay silent. Clara says I need to report this before it's too late. Her mother nodded slowly, wiping her tears. Do what you have to, Evelyn. I'll stand by you. The door suddenly swung open, and Aiden stepped inside, his face dark with fury. What's going on here? He demanded, his eyes darting between Evelyn and her mom. Evelyn rose to her feet, hiding her phone behind her back. We're done playing your game, Aiden. I know what you're doing, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. His lips curled into a sneer. You think anyone will believe you? It's your word against mine. Evelyn met his gaze, her fear melting into determination. Not anymore. I have the proof. The room filled with tension as Aiden realized the tide had turned. Evelyn wasn't just a pawn in his game anymore, she was ready to fight back. Aiden's sneer faded as he gauged Evelyn's determination. For the first time, she saw something rare flash in his eyes: uncertainty. But it lasted only a moment before his mask of confidence slid back into place. You're bluffing, he said, his voice low and venomous. You have nothing. Evelyn's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. Her phone, filled with photos of his damning files, was a lifeline. She didn't know how far she was willing to go, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't back down now. I have more than enough, she shot back, lifting her chin defiantly. And if you try to stop me, I'll make sure the authorities know everything about your little schemes. Aiden's gaze darted to Evelyn's mother, who stood behind her daughter, torn between fear and disbelief. Helen, are you really going to let her do this? Do you even know what she's accusing me of? Her mother hesitated, looking at Evelyn with wide, pleading eyes. Evelyn, is it true? Do you really have proof? Evelyn nodded firmly. I do, Mom. Enough to make sure Aiden answers for what he's done. Aiden's hands curled into fists at his sides. You're going to destroy this family, he hissed. Do you understand that? You think the police will stop at me? They'll come for you, for Helen. You'll be dragged into this mess, all because you couldn't mind your own business. Don't you dare twist this around, Evelyn snapped, her voice breaking with emotion. You're the one who put us in danger, Aiden, not me. You chose this, and now you're facing the consequences. Aiden stepped closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. You have no idea what you're doing. Evelyn, he growled. You don't know the kind of people involved in this deal. They won't stop at me. They'll come after you, your mother, everyone you love. The words sent a chill through her, but Evelyn held her ground. Then it's even more important that I stop this now, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. I won't let you drag us into something we can't get out of. Her mother stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on Aiden's arm. Aiden, stop this, she pleaded. Please, tell me this isn't true. Tell me this is just a misunderstanding. He shrugged off her touch, his eyes narrowing. You don't get it, do you? Everything I've done has been for us, for this family. Do you think the money comes from nowhere? I've worked my ass off to give you both a life most people can only dream of. By lying? By breaking the law? Evelyn shot back. That's not something to be proud of. It's something to be ashamed of. Aiden glared at her, his confidence cracking as the walls of his deception began to close in. You're making a mistake, he said quietly, his voice losing its edge. You think you're the hero here, but all you're doing is ruining everything I've built. Evelyn took a step closer, her voice steady. I'm doing what you should have done. I'm protecting my family. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. For a moment, it seemed as though Aiden might lash out, but instead he turned abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. Fine, he muttered. You win. Go ahead, call the police, see what happens. Evelyn didn't move, her phone gripped tightly in her hand. She looked at her mother, who was silently crying, and felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't just about Aiden anymore, it was about her family's future. Her voice softened. Mom, I'm sorry you have to go through this, but it's the only way. He's not going to stop, and I can't let him drag us down with him. Her mother nodded through her tears, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. Do what you have to, Evelyn. With trembling fingers, Evelyn dialed the number she never thought she'd have to call. The operator's voice was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the chaos in her heart. I'd like to report a crime, she said, her voice cracking. There's evidence of fraud and illegal activity. I can provide proof. As the call ended, Evelyn felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The weight of what she'd just unsettled over her, but so did a quiet certainty that she'd made the right choice. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Aiden stopped pacing, his expression hardening as he realized his time had run out. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low and filled with venom. Maybe, Evelyn replied, meeting his gaze with steel in her eyes. But at least I'll know I did the right thing. When the officers arrived, Evelyn handed over the evidence she'd gathered, her heart pounding as they took Aiden into custody. Her mother clung to her side, trembling but resolute. As the door closed behind the officers, Evelyn felt a strange calm settle over her. The storm wasn't over, but she'd weathered the worst of it. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that things might get better.